The other day I came across the 1950s Disney Alice in Wonderland animation, and I thought, why not draw Alice, as I needed an inspiration since I had an artist block for a very long time. I decided to use watercolour, and I also have Japanese paints. I really should learn what they're called, but I'm using Winsor & Newton watercolour. Now, the author of this classic, Alice in Wonderland, is Lewis Carroll. That, of course, was his pen name. His real name was Charles Ludwig Dodgson. He was a mathematician at Oxford University. He also took up photography, which gets interesting as you look into his life in further detail. Dodgson, aka Lewis Carroll, was actually deaf in one ear and had a stammer. It was said his stammer disappeared when he spoke to children. Around the late 1850s, Dean Liddell and his family moved into Christ Church by Oxford University. Now, the dean had 3 daughters named Lorena, Edith, and Alice. Carroll became friends with them. Now, Carroll has denied any correlation of his character Alice from Alice in Wonderland being based on any real little girl. However, it was on a rowing trip with the girls, the dean's daughters, including Alice Liddell, is when the outline of Alice in Wonderland came about. The novel was finally published in 1865, and it's considered to be one of the first novels that introduced the first golden age of British children's literature. And now this is because there was a clear distinction from adult literature and children's literature. Previously, novels written for children had a condescending tone, teaching morals and warning what would happen to them if they didn't follow the rules. Instead, Carroll was direct in manner of speaking to the reader, which was the child, like an equal. Not to mention that the main character was a little girl having an agency, a voice, through her own adventure. This is revolutionary for the Victorian age, considering the cultural norm was little girls must be seen, not heard. Since the 1940s, many critics have debated over whether Carroll's interest in children was as innocent as it was portrayed. This is stemmed from his photography and drawings of nude and semi-nude photos of children. It is said that he had around 30 surviving nude and semi-nude photos of children, along with drawings. Around 60% of his original work was destroyed. To top it all off, his friendship with the Liddell family came to an abrupt end. Many late 20th century biographers began to question Carroll's relationship with children. Morton Cohen speculates that Carroll was suppressing his sexual energies. A new version of Lewis Carroll was born. A stammering, repressed, obsessive, asocial, and increasing leniency to what one may call paedophilia? A suppressed paedophile, to say the least. However, researchers counter-argue this portrayal. Caroline Leach dubbed this the Carroll myth. She argues that these allegations of paedophilia arises from misinterpretation and misunderstanding of Victorian morals. There was this Victorian child cult, in which child nudity was revered and considered art, as it was a symbol of purity and expression of innocence. Child nudity was fashionable and mainstream during the Victorian era. However, this doesn't mean just because something is mainstream that it's okay, and that it doesn't mean that children weren't exploited. The Victorian era was also famous for child labour, with chimney sweepers being a symbol of the abuse and harsh treatment children endured. During the early 1860s, Carroll was incredibly self-loathing. He was confessional and wrote in his diaries that he was vile and worthless. He also was found to have written extensive love poetry during that time. 4 volumes of his intrinsically detailed diaries and 7 pages of text are missing. The 7 pages were cut out by hand, and there is much speculation, as the missing pages from the diary coincide with the years spent with the little girls. Carroll's nephew had written a summary about the missing pages and the break from the Liddells, based on what he had heard from his aunts. It is said that there was a gossip of Carroll and the Liddells' governess, as well as a relationship with the eldest daughter. These rumours show that the break had nothing to do with the youngest, Alice Liddell. Obviously, it goes without saying that even if it had nothing to do with Alice and it was with the eldest daughter, Lorena was still a child and there was a significant age gap between her and Carroll. But I digress. The break from the Liddells and the missing diary extracts become even more mysterious as a letter from Lorena Liddell to Alice Liddell was found, in which she writes to Alice soon after a biographer of Carroll interviews her. Lorena tells Alice what she told the biographer and the reason she gave for the break from Carroll. In the letter, it said, "I said his manner became too affectionate to you as you grew older, and that mother spoke to him about it, and that offended him, so he ceased coming to visit us again, as one had to find some reason for all intercourse ceasing. Mr. D used to take you on his knee." I did not say that. This letter, directly from Lorena, exposes an entirely different view from the gossip that Carroll's nephew had heard. Obviously, the emphasis on Mr. D used to take you on his knee, I did not say that, is debatable. She could be saying that she didn't see a reason to tell the biographer, but perhaps this is just good wishing on our part. Rather, it seems more realistic to think that they both knew that a young girl sitting on a stranger's knee is definitely questionable. Many conclude that Lewis Carroll was a man of his time, as the things we find absurd was popular and mainstream during the Victorian era. And as modern 21st century viewers and readers, we are unable to understand the Victorian perspective. However, the modern day perspective of child abuse and crossing boundaries and women's rights came about through years of realization from the past. And our past, in this context, is the Victorian era. Women didn't even have the right to vote during the 1800s. Many women had little to no rights. Young girls and women had little legal protection and were extremely vulnerable to sexual exploitation. The cultural norms in upper middle-class British families also maintained lesser positions for girls and women. Many abusive men took advantage of these girls. It took years of mental, physical, sexual abuse of young girls and women for our modern moral standing point. It is through the efforts of women fighting for civil rights and recognition that it's realized wrong. What's considered wrong now was through the years of hidden and misunderstood exploitation. Thank you for watching. See you next time.